I've got James Garrett with me today at Live on Purpose TV to help us know how to find inspiration for writing. Where does the inspiration come from? Well, maybe that's not what we're going to answer today, but how do we get that inspiration? I brought in an expert. This is James Garrett. He and I did an episode recently at Live on Purpose Radio, and James, you said a few things to me in that interview that I thought would be totally relevant to this particular topic. Can you see that?
Yeah.
You're an expert in shall I say, positive psychology and how to operate the equipment of your own brain.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's my passion. Yeah, that's
there
right.
You go.
That's what I love, is how do you get this thing to work better?
So you shared with me on the radio that there are basically two modes of brain functioning. Now, that simplifies it a lot, and I know that, but I think it's a useful model. Could you share that with our listeners today?
Sure. Yeah. So there are basically two primary modes of attention that your brain goes between.
Okay.
Right? One is like a stay on task mode. Sometimes psychologists call it executive mode. This is anytime you have to put mental effort into something. So if you're concentrating, you're focusing, you're writing that email, even in this conversation we're having, we're in executive mode.
Right. We're carrying out a task.
Yeah.
That's very focused and intentional.
Yeah, it requires you to direct your attention at something.
Right.
You're paying attention, right? Mm-hmm. The other primary mode that of attention that your brain goes into is something called creative mode or mind-wandering mode.
Interesting. Mind-wandering, that almost has a negative connotation to it.
Yeah. Well, we've stigmatized it.
At least traditionally,
for decades.
right?
That's right.
Okay, but you're labeling it first creative mode.
Yeah.
And then you added this mind-wandering part. So take us through that a little bit.
Sure.
What is that?
So if you were to look this up, look in the science, you would find it as mind-wandering mode. That's what psychologists call it. The word I like to use is creative mode. Some people call it imagination mode. Scott Barry Kaufman, a psychologist at UPenn, calls it imagination mode.
Okay.
But basically, this is what your mind does when you don't require it to do anything at all.
Oh, gotcha.
So if you're going for a drive, right? It's not traffic, it's not stressful, you're on a country road.
You're kind of on autopilot.
Yeah, you're making small adjustments to the wheel or whatever. What is your mind doing? It thinks about what you ate for breakfast.
It's wandering. Yeah, right.
Right? And then that reminds you of a conversation you had with your spouse. And then that reminds you, oh yeah, I need to pick up this thing at the store. It's literally just wandering
around. It's going from one thing to the next.
Yeah, so we have this kind of weird model of the brain, like an intuitive model, that if we're not working, that our brain turns off like a light switch, right?
Oh.
And the correct metaphor is actually to switch the light switch sideways and to flip it side to side. So if you're in executive mode, your brain, the good news is your brain actually never turns off.
Right.
It always is working.
It's always on.
So it will be in this executive mode, which is where most of us spend most of our time in a given day. But also when you let it rest, when you give it a break, it flips to this mind-wandering or creative mode. Well, we didn't really know what was going on until the last 5 or 10 years in this other mode. In fact, we also, just like you said, we kind of stigmatized it. We thought, well, this must be a waste of time. And in school, of course, we would say, oh, that kid is daydreaming.
Because it doesn't feel like we're on task.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're not.
We're not being unproductive.
But we're not being unproductive. It's not on task the way we're used to thinking about being productive.
Yes.
So what you're saying is this is a very important aspect of our creativity, which ties right into our question, how do I get inspiration for writing?
Yes.
So you're saying, let your mind wander a little.
That's right.
Is that it?
That's exactly right. And what you want to do is you want to go between these two modes in a given day.
Okay.
So you want to spend, say, 90 minutes in executive mode, and then step away from the computer or your desk.
You're talking on purpose.
On purpose. And go for a walk for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe you take a big break in the afternoon when your energy is low anyways. And if you look at artists and scientists and inventors and all these folks who we say, wow, they've really contributed something amazing to society. You find these very similar patterns. They work really intensely in the mornings.
Okay.
Right? They have some morning ritual they go through, and then they have this, 3 to 4 hour block of time where they'll take little breaks in between, but this is their executive mode. This is when they're in writing mode, if it's writing, right?
Right.
And then their afternoons don't look like what we usually think of as work. They go for walks, they take naps, they socialize, they hang out.
Dang, this is sounding fun.
It's good, right?
Hey, but that's part of the deal, right?
That is part of the deal.
You know what, James? I say this all the time. If we're not having fun, we're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
That's it.
But you're saying, okay, so this switches our brain into a different mode. And if we're looking for that creative edge, that what we're doing really is empowering our own brain to provide us with exactly what it is that we're looking for, but we have to get it out of that other mode first.
Because your brain operates differently in these two modes.
Right.
So when you go into creative mode, your brain activates something called the default mode network.
Okay.
Default mode network. It's a series of regions, right, in your brain that it basically turns on when you go into this mode and quiets down the concentration or attentional parts of your brain.
Traditionally, right here behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex.
That's right. So it quiets those down and activates this totally different part of your brain. And as it does that, these parts of your brain are much better they're much freer with how they're organizing information.
Right.
They have
a different job.
They have a different job.
Yeah.
They're actually more playful with ideas.
Right.
So as your mind is wandering, it's not linear and logical. It sort of feels random, right, as you experience it. But there is vast processing happening that's even unconscious, that you don't even experience.
Yes.
And in that, all we experience is the moment of insight. The epiphany.
When it clicks.
But what we don't realize is that your brain unconsciously has been really trying to solve that problem for hours, maybe even days, maybe even weeks.
And it's looking around in places that you wouldn't have thought to send it.
That's right.
Because that's what these other parts of your brain do. That's what their job is.
What you want to do in executive mode is basically two things. You want to learn a domain. Okay, so if your expertise is psychology, if your expertise is nutrition, if it's medicine, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever it is,
programming,
you just want to keep pumping your brain full of good information by reading, by downloading, educational content, whatever that is. So you want to learn, you want to pack it with good information, and you also want to clearly define the problem that you're working on.
Yeah.
Like what?
That's the structured part of all this.
Yeah, and this is what
that makes sense.
You want to get to clarity about what you're trying to solve.
Right.
Right. Whether it's a structure for how to, whether it's the central thesis of what you're writing about, whether it's if it's fiction, if it's a character that you just know needs to be there, but you can't quite figure out the dimensions or the complexities of that character.
Right.
What is the problem that you're facing? Oftentimes it's more than one problem, right?
Sure.
But if you can define that in executive mode and then just let it be and go for a walk.
Step back from it.
Yeah. You don't want to keep trying to figure it out at the computer. I always ask people, where do you have your best ideas? And nobody ever says behind my computer.
The keyboard.
Right?
You know what? It usually is like in the shower.
In the shower.
Or while I'm walking the dog.
Right?
Or just before I'm ready to fall asleep.
Everybody says that.
Yeah. And you're saying this is because of the way our brain is organized.
That's right.
And the way that it functions.
That's right. Yeah, so you have vast untapped powers of creativity.
Right.
But because these modes, that switch metaphor is apt because when it's in one mode, it actually cannot be in the other mode. They're mutually exclusive. So in order to actually really access all of your creative potential, it's like a requirement to go into creative mode or mind-wandering mode. Basically go back and forth between these, because if you don't, if you stay at that computer and you're just trying to figure that out, you're closing the window on the creative side of your brain in the name of being productive. Could you just share one other thing with us that you've shared with me before, but I think this is important for you too, because what you shared with me, James, is that it's kind of like fueling and depleting or charging. And do you remember what you shared about that in the two different modes? Could you share that as well? Because I think that's relevant. You bet. So your brain works a lot like your cell phone battery. So when you wake up in the morning, you've basically got a full charge. You know, if you didn't sleep well, maybe you've got 70 or 80%, right? Or maybe 50.
We're assuming that you charged up.
If the kids were interrupting at night, maybe it's 50.
Yeah, exactly.
But in general, right, you've got 100% charge.
Sure.
So you wake up, and then throughout your day, you're literally using up mental energy.
You can see the little battery icon shrinking.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And this is why late at night we get more irritable.
Yeah.
This is why we get hangry right before dinner.
Executive functioning, that attention part of your brain is an energy hog.
Yes.
It's gobbling up your battery.
That's right.
That doesn't mean don't use it. I mean, that's what it's there for.
That's what it's there for.
That's what it's there for. But it is depleting your battery.
Yeah, and it's also responsible for self-control. Attention and all of those executive functions are all right behind your forehead.
Right.
So as you're using up, you know, think of it this way: it's only one single battery. Whether it's resisting brownies, whether it's
you had to throw that in.
I know, right? Whether it's staying focused on a difficult task for a long period of time, whether it's controlling negative emotions and not just letting yourself unleash on somebody you're angry at. All of that draws on the same
takes power
mental battery.
Right.
It requires physical neurotransmitters to do that work. And as you use them up, you run on your battery lowers and lower. This is why writers write in the morning. Yes. You look at Stephen King or any of these really famous writers, the reason they all write in the morning, there's a really great book called How Artists Work, which profiles a lot of very famous writers. The reason is they've got their best, most concentrated, like power energy in the morning.
In the morning. That's true for me. I've written all of my books
is that right?
Before 7 a.m.
Interesting.
So I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
We've got another video. Okay. And you guys, there's more that I want to talk to James about. We'll put that in another video about enhancing performance. And so you might want to check that one out as well. To wrap this one up, I think as we understand that our brain has these two functions, okay, and you need them both, right? Yep. This executive functioning, the paying attention, it sort of drains the battery. The mind-wandering part recharges
the battery.
Recharges it.
Yeah.
And so, how about we get past the guilt and shame of taking a walk?
Yeah.
Or taking a nap?
Yeah. That's right.
And there's other brain-friendly practices that we can do. We'll address those in the other video. How do you get inspiration for writing? Get into that part of your brain.
Yeah.
And let it wander around a little bit. Yeah. And then the executive part will structure it and order it for you. It's as it should be.
And when you're in creative mode, always walk with a notebook and a pen.
Oh, just to capture it.
Because you will have these little micro ideas.
Yeah.
Again and again and again. And creativity doesn't hit you as a fully fleshed out idea.
No.
It hits you as thousands of little micro ideas. And if you don't capture those when you have them, you will lose them.
Yeah. Just capture. Don't process.
Don't process. No, it doesn't have to be pretty. Yeah, I don't write in complete sentence. It's like free form writing, right?
Right.
But just capture it as you're in that creative mode. It's critical.
Oh, that's awesome. Hopefully that's going to help with the inspiration part of things. Thanks, James.
You bet.
What I love about James's material is he helps us to learn how to operate the equipment of our own brain, get it working for us. If you like this episode, please share it with someone.